Thank you again, everybody. And I am going to introduce our speakers for this talk. Ayan Tani, Emma Paling, and Sarah Nafisa Shahid. Before I hand it over to our speakers, I'll just explain how the meeting will work. The speakers will go first for a total of 30 minutes. Then we'll have questions and comments from the audience. The speakers will respond to your questions and comments at the end in their concluding remarks. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and I'll add you to the speakers list. I'll be using an equity speakers list, which means I may not call on you in the sequence that you raised your hands, but I will be prioritizing Indigenous, Black, comrades of color, women, and first-time speakers. Questions and/or comments are welcome, but please try to keep your contribution to 3 minutes. This will allow for more contributions during the discussion. Finally, we encourage you to post to social media throughout the conference to share your thoughts and experiences. Please use the hashtag RedOctober2025. You can tag Spring on our platforms using @SpringMag.ca. Okay, now over to our speakers.
Thank you, Sarah Jessica. So our session today is going to be a little, I don't know, it's exciting for us because it's going to be actually a live podcast session. And you'll get to, we will be recording this session and you will see why it's a live podcast session when we get into it. Okay, so welcome everyone to Spring Radio's first ever live session. Yeah. Spring Radio is a podcast for socialist ideas in action. I'm Sarah Nafisa Shahid. I'm a Spring member and co-host of the Spring Radio podcast. In today's session, we are getting to the crux of why we have a podcast to begin with, as well as a website regularly populated with articles, very timely articles, and also a vibrant social media presence. These are part of what Spring considers the tradition of revolutionary journalism. This is a concept that's been part of revolutionary practice throughout history. So Lenin called the revolutionary newspaper as the scaffolding of the party, and I'm using quotation marks, air quotations here. What he meant by that is that how it is important to spread, not only important to spread socialist ideas, but and it's not just a intellectual practice, but in fact it is an important way to develop what he called cadres, or what we can now call, correspondents or journalists or members and activists, people who make up the organization that is Spring, right? And these are not just people who are active inside Spring, but these are people who are rooted in movements, right, and have a direct line to a central organizing body, in this case, the editorial board, and then can generalize the lessons from the struggles on the ground that they're witnessing, they're experiencing, they're struggling together with, and broadcast that across the organization, across movements, across the country, and sometimes even across the world. And the publication for us is the medium through which our organization and the working class are constantly in a conversation with each other. So in this session, we will delve deeper into how other revolutionaries since then have adapted that theory to meet the needs of the moment, right? So this is where Trinidad and Tobago-born Black feminist Claudia Jones and Egyptian Marxist Hossam El-Hamalawy come in. Both have taken the concept of the revolutionary newspaper and expanded it into the practices that meet the moment they were organizing in. In the current moment in Canada, we face a complex set of challenges. Social media is increasingly antagonistic to revolutionary thought, practice, and ideas. People are increasingly isolated, they're alienated. We live in a more atomized society. There is an entire organized network of misinformation, disinformation, and obviously we have brain rot, AI schlop. So in this session, myself, Emma, and Ayan will kind of collectively work through how Spring is approaching this time, approaching these challenges, and how we're trying to rethink the concept of revolutionary newspaper, revolutionary journalism to adapt to our times and our moments. Okay, so before we get into the meat of it all, Emma and Ayan, I wanted to know from each of you maybe how you got into journalism to begin with, because I know each of you are journalists in your actual lives. So I will start with Ayan and then with Emma. Or we can go the other way around too.
Yeah, absolutely. I came into journalism through activism and documentary filmmaking. My grandfather was a poet, and he was a member of the Somali Youth League. It's the first political party in Somalia. And my father was part of a voluntary service group called UFO that also had a newspaper attached to it. UFO means the sweet smelling rain before the storm. And it was used to tell people about the clinics they were building. So the idea that writing can affect change was ingrained in me from a young age. But I'll fast forward to my adulthood. I moved to Toronto to pursue filmmaking. And I've been lucky enough to be part of a lot of projects that were primarily about preserving Black Canadian culture and heritage. So unwittingly, I was following in the tradition of Claudia Jones, but I'll talk more about that later. Shortly after moving to Toronto, I made friends with Sarah. We were volunteering at a film festival, and she was like, "You should come to a Spring meeting." And I was like, I don't know.
That's how it happens.
Yeah. And she just kind of kept bothering me about it. I didn't end up going for like 3 years. 3 years later, I started going to Spring meetings, and it was because I was desperate to join any effort for a struggle for Palestine. I went to every meeting on the block, so Spring was okay for me at that point.
It wasn't me. I didn't win it.
You know, sorry, it was Palestine. Yeah, at the time I was working for a public news broadcaster, and it was so surreal. Like every day I would go into work, and the walls are like lined with TVs playing the 24-hour news cycle, and you're supposed to go into the story meeting like when you look up from your cubicle, you're just seeing birds and not entire universes being bombed. It's crazy making, it's devastating, but also clarifying. I knew that I could never make meaningful work there. And at the same time, I was really inspired by journalists working in Gaza, Wael Al-Dadu, Anas Al-Sharif, Allah yarhamoh, Bisan Auda, Hind Kudari, just their bravery and courage to be covering the news every single day about their homeland. And it inspired me to go to Detroit, Michigan. I went to the People's Conference for Palestine. I had also, just like a year prior, I was working on this program called Black Life, and there was an episode about the civil rights era, 1960s Montreal. And so part of my research, I was working closely with David Austin and learning a lot about this conference. It was called the Congress for Black Writers. And big names were there, like Walter Rodney, James Baldwin, CLR James. And it was exciting because they were kind of doing the exact same thing we're doing here. They're working with this question, what is to be done? So when I heard about the People's Conference for Palestine, I was like, I have to go. I have to record it for myself. Like, it's not enough that someone else is gonna like live stream it on Instagram. I need my own record. And yeah, so my coverage produced 3 pieces for Spring. A news article about a campaign that the Palestinian Youth Movement launched, Mascarf Maersk, and 2 podcast episodes, lessons from the student encampment, and one front, and that one was about labor organizing. Yeah, so for me, what's so exciting about conferences like the ones that I just named, are their ability to introduce, disseminate, and mobilize ideas on a mass scale. Should I repeat that? No, okay. So you can go ahead.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. Okay. So my name is Emma Paling. I'm an independent journalist, a member of Spring. I'm on Spring's editorial board, and I'm also the editor of our first booklet, Indigenous Socialism, which is available at the book table for a very reasonable $10. So you can go get a copy after this session. I am also a professional journalist. I write for nonprofit outlets like The Grind, The Maple, and The Breach. But I actually started out in mainstream journalism and got radicalized through reporting, which is kind of the opposite way that a lot of people come to Spring. So I used to work at more mainstream corporate outlets like the Huffington Post and CBC News, but I always had an instinct to talk to everyday people and activists. I always just was more drawn to them and trusted them more than politicians. And I actually interviewed a lot of people who are now part of Spring, who had gone on to form Spring, including Dina Ladd, who's here, Sarah, Dave Bush, Pam, when these people were leading movements for decent work, for paid sick days during the pandemic. They were the people that I learned to trust. And that's how I learned a lot of socialist ideas that just made more sense to me than what I was hearing elsewhere. For example, the idea that the underfunding of public services comes before privatization. I learned that by talking to nurses, not by interviewing NDP MPs or MPPs or anything like that. And so I left the more dominant mainstream industry to go to The Breach. And like I said, now I'm independent. And I just wanted to add a bit because of what Ayan said about the crazy-making last 2 years of watching the genocide. I was lucky that I worked at an independent outlet when that started in 2023. And then I got to do investigative journalism about the journalism industry, which further clarified my politics. And I think provided work that helped other people clarify their politics as well. So on The Breach, we published analyses of the content that was being published on CBC and CTV. I also did investigative work interviewing the journalists in those newsrooms, and was able to publish things like, emails where CBC's leadership was justifying a double standard on Israel's violence because they kill people using remote means instead of directly, and the soldiers don't actually have to see the people they're killing, so it's therefore not as bad. So it was a good opportunity that I got to do that, but I think journalists everywhere have had a difficult and morally challenging last 2 years, for sure. Sarah, how did you get into journalism?
Thanks for asking that question back to me. My day job is not actually in journalism, but I did write. I've been writing for a long time. I'm from Bangladesh. I was writing there, and then in university I was writing as well. And then when I moved to Toronto, this was right after I moved to Toronto. COVID hit, and sort of the murder of George Floyd happened in the U.S., so Black Lives Matter was mobilizing, and I was going to protest. So I was actually following Spring to follow, just keep up to date to where the next protest is going to be. They were posting sort of here's the next action, this is how you can join. And I feel like the two of you will probably relate. There is a moment when you are a writer or a journalist and so often you come into it thinking that that's going to change the world, and then you realize it doesn't. And so there was a moment where I was like, I want to do more. I want to this is obviously not it. I want to do more. And then coincidentally, Spring had put out this call out saying, do you want to write for Spring? Email us at info@SpringMag.ca. And I was like, yeah, I do have that skill. I could do it. Maybe this is a way to get more active in movements. And I basically replied to that email. And then soon enough, I was sort of reporting on like actions. I was reporting on, like, as a Spring journalist, as a Spring cadre. And I was covering these movement actions that got me more oriented in particular to actually the decent work movement. At that time, Paid Sick Days was at the height of it, of the campaign. And now I actually work full-time in the decent work movement. I've become an organizer there. So it's really I did come into it through writing, but it really shaped the way I have evolved as an organizer, and the way I see the world. Being in Spring has sharpened my politics, and writing has been a process for me to do those things, right? The process for me to like gain a lot of clarity, strengthen my arguments, and honestly think through. Sometimes you are in these like really murky moments in life, and I think the process of writing, when you're rooted in the tradition of revolutionary journalism, gives you a lot of clarity in terms of strategy. And I'd like to kind of maybe like elaborate on some of that, like how Spring kind of sees that tradition a little bit, and how the process kind of interacts. Because I think as a pan-Canadian organization, Spring has publications that span from website to social media and podcasts, but there's some tasks that are central. There's like a purpose to the way we use these platforms. We don't use it for the sake. We're not just spreading ideas, or like we need to have a social media presence because we exist. Like it's just, that's not it, right? There's some key things that these platforms do for us. One of them is that it acts as what we call memory of the class. What that means is that it documents history from below. And when we read like mainstream media, or even like sometimes activist media or left media, you're like regurgitating like a dominant narrative, right? And I think what like revolutionary journalism does is it retells the history about the people making that history. I remember I read a book once about how Canada won Medicare, and it was literally just about what were the different bills that like one after another, chronological, and what did the NDP did, blah blah blah. And I was like, well, there was no record of what was the movement doing, and what were people doing. And I think Spring's approach to revolutionary journalism is to create that documentation of what the movement looks like, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the debates. And also what that does in return is raises the level of political consciousness of the working class, like it did mine. Like it raised my political consciousness. It made me understand a lot of things from the mistakes and from the lessons that I've learned in other movements that I was not part of, right? And that's the beauty of being in an organization. You don't have to be everywhere all at once. And another thing that that is a task of revolutionary journalists and revolutionary journalism is building relationships. Like the publication exists to build relationships. Every report that exists in a publication, every social media, every TikTok that happens where a worker is getting interviewed, they're getting interviewed because there's a Spring journalist there interviewing that worker. And Sarah Jessica, who's chairing our session today, done some wonderful picket line reports from the Cup W, postal strike, and others that I can't name from the top of my head. But that means that the person is going there, showing solidarity, trying to amplify the voices from the ground, and then once this content is produced, they're going back and sharing it, and the publication is it being built in the image of the struggle, of the working class, right? And I mean, also like my co-panelists here, like, I mean, I built a relationship with Ayan, and now we're on this panel together, and Emma and I knew each other before. Emma was a Spring member, and we've been like, the movements we build are the units of like relationships, right? And we've been building these relationships, and that's what the publication does. Like it's a medium to be building those relationships. And lastly, it develops our cadres, and what that means is every report you do, every podcast you build, and it's not just about interviewing, right? Like, for example, our podcast, it has an editor, it has a producer, and like today, the tech team here is recording this session. Someone's gonna edit it, cut it, someone's gonna produce the social media bit, someone's gonna design the graphic to report. There's a whole team of people who are doing this, and these are skills. These are skills we're learning for the movement, for ourselves, right? And this is important, and builds leaders in our movements. And every interview we take on, we have to do the research. We have to find these people, and these are very, very important ways that we build the organization as well. I have a wonderful example that I do want to share, if I could borrow some time, because I think that this really exemplifies what I'm trying to say. Last year, we did a podcast episode on Ontario Tech University, which was the first pro-Palestine encampment to actually win a deal with their university administration. And last fall when we did it, it was at a time when every other campus encampment was getting attacked left and right, and like at U of T, they were like they're threatening to call in the police. Like, it was like escalating so hard, whereas like this campus had won. So we wanted to interview some of the movement leaders from there and just tease out what were the lessons, like how did they win it, what were the strategies they used. And we knew that, and this is like in the span of I met this person, I think on a Friday. On a Sunday, I was like, we have to do this interview because on the Monday, the police is coming into the encampment. It was like rapid. Sunday, we did the interview. I sent it to our podcast team. One of my comrades like edited it, chopped it out, produced it. One of my other comrades like hosted it. And then by Monday, we had like this out. And this is like in Ontario, we put this out. And then our Springs Vancouver branch that is at that time simultaneously building relationship with the University of British Columbia encampment, the UBC encampment. And on the Tuesday night, the UBC encampment calls like this mass community meeting, and they're trying to decide whether they close down their encampment or they continue, right? And so the Vancouver branch then makes a transcript of this podcast, prints it, like makes an actual sheet, prints it, takes it to that encampment meeting, intervenes in the debate, and that night they decided to keep the encampment open. Like that podcast, that transcript helped make a decision, a live debate in an active struggle that day. And that is just to demonstrate the entire process of revolutionary journalism. It's not just interviewing people and reporting on things. It's about becoming the memory of the class, intervening in live struggles, and the distribution piece is so, so important. If Spring was not a pan-Canadian organization, and if we were not rooted in those struggles, there was no point in being able to produce this. We're not doing it for the sake of it, right? And we knew what were the debates coming up. We knew the urgency of it. That's why we moved to, not every podcast episode is produced in 4 days, by the way. That is not sustainable. But we knew the urgency of that moment because we were rooted in those struggles. And I think that encapsulates how we kind of see the concept of revolutionary journalism. Maybe I'll throw this question back to my co-panelist. Maybe I'll start with you, Emma. Now that we've kind of unpacked what the theory is of revolutionary journalism, like how do you think it informs kind of like your work in the daily?
Thank you. So I'll elaborate a little bit on the theory because I was asked to specifically mention one of the theorists whose name is in the title of this talk, Hossam El-Hamalawy. He's an Egyptian journalist and revolutionary. And when we started preparing for this, I was like, I don't think I have a theory. And Sarah said, you do. You do. You just have to figure out how to say it. So his theory is so simple that it's not going to take very long to explain. He lays it out in an article called The Website as an Organizer, which was very influential in like Spring's founding and why we're sort of structured around SpringMag.ca. And it's just that the website is a place where you can share lessons between organizers. That's like number one. And number two is it's a place where you can communicate the organization's position on any issue immediately. So we publish articles very quickly, as Sarah just illustrated, so that anyone who's part of Spring, even if you weren't at the last meeting, even if you haven't read all the books on all the topics, you can find out the background and the position that makes sense as a socialist immediately on the website. And I'll just illustrate specifically the function of sharing lessons with an example from my work. One example is an article that I got to write with a colleague when I worked at The Breach. If you want to read it after, the headline is "The Inside Story of How Education Workers Beat Back Doug Ford." And it was about the education workers' strike that went down a few years ago when Ford threatened all the workers with a $4,000 a day fine if they went on strike, and actually made it illegal for them to go on strike. It coalesced in, like, we were on the brink of a general strike by the end, and there was like every single union leader from the province in one room on TV. If you were only watching that on CTV or CBC, you may have thought that that had escalated really quickly and that it like built to that pressure like very fast. But the workers, the education workers, had actually been preparing for a year. So we told that story in the article. They specifically used labor organizer Jane McAlevy's model from her book, No Shortcuts. They literally called every single one of their 55,000 members, and they kept spreadsheets with every single person's name, where they worked, what they did, their phone number, what pissed them off about their boss, what did they most need at work, so that they could summarize the workers' demands, but also follow up with each of them personally. One of the specific tactics was just using phone calls instead of emails, because people ignore emails, but if they make a personal connection with someone, they're actually going to want to stay in touch. One of the organizers that I interviewed was a librarian in Ottawa named Patrick, and he said that every single one of the workers he talked to in the first conversation, they said something along the lines of, "Wow, no one has ever listened to me before." So those workers were a lot more confident and a lot more motivated to stand with their union than they would have been if they just got an email like 3 days before that went out to thousands of people. They wouldn't have been confident enough to risk a $4,000 a day fine, which was like 10% of their annual income for a lot of the workers, if they didn't know how strong their union was and they didn't have that personal investment. Another example of why keeping the records was a good tactic was there were some workplaces where Doug Ford's intimidation worked, and there was one picket line in Ontario where the first day there was nobody there. It was empty, but because the organizers had kept those spreadsheets, they knew everyone's name, they had everyone's phone number. There was an organizer who had already been in touch with each person, so they were able to have personal conversations one-on-one with each person, address their fears, and the next day the picket line was full. Another function of revolutionary journalism that Lenin talks about is making movements look attractive so that people want to join. And one of the education workers that I interviewed in that article, Michelle, she had never been involved with her union before. She told me she didn't know where the office was. She had never really cared, but she became really energized by the movement and how exciting it was at that time. And she found that the union was a place where she felt valued and empowered, which was not how she felt at work, and that's not how most of us feel at work. So the union filled a need that she had. She became a more fulfilled, healthier person, and she told me when they were on strike, even the days that it wasn't her shift, she was on the picket line, dusk till dawn, because it was fun, her friends were there, and she had an investment in it. So since we documented that, like Sarah was describing, it's free and accessible online. And now I've heard from a number of friends and acquaintances that that article is being used as required reading for other union organizing committees climate groups and different movements. So the tactics of the education workers are being spread to other workers and other organizers across the country. Ayan, would you like to tell us more about Claudia Jones and how she relates to your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. On the point of making the revolution attractive, Claudia Jones was so glamorous. She was so glamorous. The beginning of this book, To the Left of Karl Marx, the author Cara Boyce Davies, she kind of talks about like all the people that she interviewed to learn more about Claudia, like her contemporaries, and all of them were like, she was so cool, she liked a nice coat and a good time. And I just love that. I found it very refreshing. Like, yeah, I feel like that's just, and also just talking about her as like friendly and like a good cook, like all of these like positive qualities that like make someone a good friend, so naturally a good organizer. Claudia Jones was a black woman and communist, clear about her ideological orientation as she was about her identity as a black woman, writing and doing political work simultaneously. Born in Trinidad and Tobago in 1915, she wrote that her father was a journalist and that she's always been writing, which is just one of many synchronicities I feel that I have with this revolutionary ancestor. I'm obsessed with her. Moving to the United States with her family at 8 years old, she started publishing writing out of high school in a column called Claudia's Comments for a newspaper in Harlem, and worked as an editor for a local youth paper. In the same year, she joins the Communist Party and over the years grew in the party as a leader and theoretician. In March 1950, she gave a speech at a rally titled International Women's Day and the Struggle for Peace, and in it she says, when we deal with the situation of women workers, we do so not only to protect the most exploited section of the working class, but in order to rally labor progressive and our own party for work among the masses of women workers, to lead them into the emerging anti-fascist, anti-war coalition. So Jones was already under surveillance by the state for her communist activity, but it was this speech that led to her arrest, detainment, and subsequent deportation. In The Left of Karl Marx, Cara Boyce Davies argues that the United States sought to deport Jones in order to deport her ideas, which I think is a really interesting analysis. And she called the book Left of Karl Marx because Claudia Jones was interned in London, UK at Highgate Cemetery, literally to the left of Karl Marx. She was deported to the UK, not Trinidad and Tobago, because it was a colony seeking independence, and the thinking was that it would be easier to surveil her in an allied nation rather than one that was also seeking revolution. And she pushes Marxist ideas further to the left because she's what Gramsci would call an organic intellectual. She directly associated with working class people, black people, women, immigrants, and organized for their interests and opened up new territory to win. Her movement and migration is what informs her politics, and I think that's where I feel that her theory is what informs mine. This thinking of like, not I think, therefore I am, but I move, therefore I do. Like action, that's what's the power of revolutionary journalism is. And I would go as far as to say that she's an archipelago thinker or an island thinker, someone to take from Edouard Glissant can inhabit difference and relation in their thinking. And like another island girl, Audre Lorde, says that difference is what sparks creativity. It gives power to seek new ways of being in the world, to generate new ideas, as well as the courage and sustenance to act where there are no charters. That's from Sister Outsider. And when she arrived in London, UK, her writing became even more bold, critiquing American imperialism. Most of this found in editorials written in the newspaper she founded, the West Indian Gazette and the Afro-Asian Caribbean News. The paper was created in tandem with the founding of Notting Hill Carnival. I really like the opening line. She says, there are at least 80,000 good reasons why we believe a West Indian newspaper is necessary and will be welcomed. They are the 80,000 odd West Indians now resident here. I just love when like they use numbers, like there's something that really drives it home. Like, I need 100 people in my place kind of thing. Together we form a community with its own wants and problems, which our own paper alone would allow us to meet. And announcing the carnival in the paper, she wrote, a people's art is the genesis of their freedom. And in that article, she thanks all West Indians who strain to feel and hear and reflect their idiom, even as they strain to feel the warmth of their sun-drenched islands and its immemorable beauty of landscape and terrain. The carnival is a testament to the role of arts in bringing people together for common aims and to its fusion of the cultural, spiritual, as well as political and economic interests of West Indians in the UK and at home. Yeah, so ultimately Claudia Jones linked the articulation of ideas, be it journalism, poetry, or the arts, directly to a politics of Black resistance and all struggles for social change. So with that, Sarah, can you elaborate further on these ideas? How has Spring developed these theories from Lenin, Claudia, and Hossam?
Okay, that's a great question. And I'll try to be brief because I know we're running close to time. But I think this is a very important question because, as I said, one of the main things that Spring is doing, or the way we're approaching it, is not in a static way, but we're making theory in practice, right? And so, so one of the things, for example, when Hossam El-Hamalawy wrote that article about website as an organizer, this was kind of, I think, around the Arab Spring, or like right after the Arab Spring. I forget the exact, I don't know if it was before or after, but it was like 2011 or 2012. And he was writing it because to really encapsulate how mass and big Arab Spring was, and that you couldn't really be everywhere all at once, right? Egypt was also like a big country, and then all these other countries joined the Arab Spring. So the publication was a way that you could be in a demonstration in like Cairo, but be able to like report back and have like a centralized voice and be in conversation with other people in other places. And this was a sort of like not upgrade, but it was like sort of like a move away from the blogging era. So I don't know if people remember the blogging era. It used to be like a cool thing on the internet once upon a time. I guess Substack is coming back, so maybe it's gonna be cool again, who knows? But you know, blogging used to be cool. So then socialists were blogging, then website was a cool thing, then website people with socialists were on the website. And now brain rot is cool, so now we're making Marxist brain rot. But you get the gist, right? So Spring kind of got onto the social media scene around like 2019, when it started 2019, and at that time social media played such a crucial role in movements, and that was how people were entering into into like these kind of like leftist ideas. I mean, how many people here found Spring through its Instagram? Like, just raise your hand. Okay, that's not a lot. Usually in our like branch meeting, it's like overwhelmingly people are like, we came here because we saw like this thing on the internet. I saw Spring because I was on the internet. I was too chronically online. But the reality is that people nowadays don't really, especially younger people, we've lost the art of meeting people in real life. Like, IRL doesn't exist. And more we are getting into these spaces, and like even the way work is structured for many of us is that we don't get to build that camaraderie with our coworkers. We don't really know our neighbors. Most of the times we hate everybody. Especially if they don't look like us, well, who knows? And so the online space is a space where you're able to interact and permeate with people. But again, that cannot be detached from the work on the ground. And that goes back to the work of both Claudia Jones and Hossam El-Hamalawy, and obviously Lenin, is like, it is an extension of what the organization is. It's an extension of what the organization does. And ultimately, it is about building real relationships with each other, with humans, and bringing those people who interact with the ideas online into activity, because that's our goal. We want bigger numbers, wider layers of people in activity, in struggle together, learning together, making mistakes together, and learning from it, but we want to be struggling together. And I think that's where I think the way we are approaching social media and TikTok is a little unique. We're not just we're not just shit posting. We're really like trying to get people out to meetings and meeting people and pushing them outwards to movements. We don't want to be in a room full of socialists and leftists just talking to each other and speaking theory. We want people to be actually grounded and be working with workers and building things together. And one thing I'll say is like the podcast is a very interesting thing we've done, I think, and Ayan works on the podcast with me as well, where this actually came up at a pub conversation where we were like, so we can't post anything online because Meta has banned news. So there used to be a time where you could like post an article on Facebook and add your own comment, and then other people would like comment back and be like, I don't agree, and there was like a huge fight, and then we'd go back and forth, and that would be discourse. Like real discourse. You're like family member, like the weird uncle would be like, why are you posting this? And it was hard, it was horrible, but like, at least you were having conversation. Now you're watching most of the content you get on Instagram or TikTok is professional content, right? It's like either AI or like some professional is making this content, influencer is making this content for you. And so all of these social media platforms are obviously owned by corporations, and in Canada specifically, the distribution of news is quite narrow. So increasingly, people are not really in touch, and people are not in conversation with each other or the internet sphere at all. So that's where we were thinking about it, and we were like, okay, maybe a podcast might be an interesting way to get around the news ban and get around sort of all like this algorithm restrictions, so that, and also be able to do a bit of a deep dive in some of the topics, because we don't always get to do that in like short forms, and increasingly all the platforms are pushing for short form videos. So then we started this, the podcast, and just got like really good response. And one of the interesting things about the platform is that you get to, going back to the building relationships part, you really get to like build that relationship, because you're like in a conversation with someone for like 30 whole minutes, actually more, because like we try to keep the episode for 30 minutes, but the interview's longer, and then you really go in depth with the person, and then it doesn't end there. You're like, okay, what can we do next? What's up, etc. And it's a continuous thing. And so we found that the podcast was a very interesting way to sort of evolve the lessons from like Hossam El-Hamalawy and Claudia Jones and Lenin, and bring it to the modern times where you can't really distribute news anymore. And I'll sort of like end on that part specifically. I think that Spring stresses a lot on distribution. The reason the publication is still central and it still exists is because members are taking it out to people. Like the distribution networks is just actual cadres, actual people who are doing these things, and they're going back to the picket line to be like, hey, we did this article, here's your story, or like, hey, what's the follow-up? Oh, this is the analysis. Like they're going back into the movements with the things we're producing, and it is the members who are sharing it with their friends and family and being like, what do you think about this? This is the argument, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I recently wrote like a film review, and this is going back to like all the fun stuff Claudia Jones would do. Like we also love fun things at Spring. And you know what? And at first I was like, oh, this is not revolutionary journalism. But then I was like, I stand corrected. It is revolutionary journalism, because I was in a film group chat and someone said One Battle After Another is not a revolutionary film. And I said, no, it is a revolutionary film, and I wrote an article about it, and it's 1,500 words, and it rocks. And I sent it to everybody because I had to distribute that work. And guess what? In that film chat, I won that argument. Put this in record. So just all that to say is that, capitalism has us on a chokehold, but we have fun ways to work around it. That's what we're doing today. So we're tight on time, so maybe, I don't know if Ayan or Emma, do you have any last words around how revolutionary journalism kind of builds what we call socialism from below, right? Like that's what the course is about today.
Yeah, I can briefly touch on it. I think like to understand how we build socialism from below, we need to know what's socialism from above, which is this idea that there's like people that we can appoint to help us win. Like we just pick leaders and then they'll help us, and that's just never what happens. What really happens is that capitalism produces an opposition from below. Real people taking control of their lives by working together and creating cadres of self-determination. I'll restart. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, what we see every day is capitalism produces its opposition from below. Real people taking control of their lives by working together, creating cadres of self-determination. So think unions, community fridges, or revolutionary newspapers. There are these islands of cooperation and solidarity necessary for survival, and it makes the shimmering image of utopia that we have in our mind realer and clearer. What do you hear all the time outside of the bubble of this conference or your socialist circles when you talk about the prospect of socialism in Canada? Hoop dream, fantasy, never gonna happen. But it's like what Asada Shakur teaches us, the bridge between dreams and reality is action.
I don't know if I want to add my 2 cents after ending on that beautiful note, but I just have 2 like really brief ideas to add. One is that this style of journalism reverses the traditional power structure that we live in and that we see reproduced in most of the media. So we were talking about this last night in Dina's remarks, and also Dave from the crowd. If you weren't here, it's like this idea that ever since kindergarten, we're inundated with this idea that there's like people who are smart enough to have power, and the rest of us, like, you only deserve to make decisions if you've worked at Goldman Sachs and worn a suit every day for like the past 40 years, and the rest of us are just dumb and should get a job. In this type of journalism, we're presenting everyday people, workers, and tenants as the experts on policy because they're the experts on their own lives. They know what their problems are, and therefore they know what would make their lives better. And another way that journalism can build socialism from below is that it just builds the skills that are relevant to organizing. So as Sarah said, like, most of the time we don't want to answer our phone. Millennials are scared of voicemails and answering the door. But if you're gonna write for Spring, which we tend to encourage everyone to do when they join, you can't just go to a demonstration and like stand there awkwardly and never talk to anyone. You have to learn how to go up to strangers and start political conversations. When I started organizing with a tenants union, the main activity that we needed to do was going door to door, door knocking. And if I hadn't done interviews before, I think I would have been a lot more shy and a lot more scared. But that's basically an interviewing skill. I'm trying to get my own neighbors to start talking about the landlord, to connect it to my problems with the landlord, and to get them to continue talking once they do start talking. So it's the exact same skills.
Oh, thank you.
I can go first, it's okay. Yeah, I have a few things to say. So I think one thing about Spring that will address a few people's comments is that anyone can write for Spring, like anyone in this room, anyone who emails, messages, sends a DM, can produce a podcast, write an article, contribute a social media video. So it's really empowering. And oftentimes when people from other movements email us asking, like, will you cover this issue? We say, you can cover it and we'll publish it. So I think that's one way that we're challenging like the messaging that we normally get. And again, reversing that power dynamic where there's professional journalists who get to decide who gets heard. We're actually getting the movements themselves to create the message, and then we're just providing resources and an editor and like the distribution and the website. Another thing that I wanted to add about just getting around approved spokespeople, I think that's a huge issue for anyone who's producing media or who's a journalist, and it is for mainstream reporters too, who I know like are frustrated with that. But if you have to file a story every day and your deadline is like 3 p.m. and you know this labor leader or politician or university expert's going to answer their phone, like you ultimately don't have that much of a choice. It's a lot more work to find people in person, but I can just share a few strategies that have worked for me. So first of all, going in person to picket lines, you're gonna meet the workers themselves, not just the elected leadership. And also just kind of playing dumb, like the labor story that I was talking about, we interviewed a ton of people who probably would have been told no if they had asked, can I do an interview? They were not the approved spokespeople, but we called them like within a few hours of getting their phone numbers and asked them to call us back the same day. And then every person that you talk to, you ask them what's like 2 or 3 names of other people that you know who have been part of this, what are their phone numbers, and call them immediately. Practically, it just means you have to try to get to the workers and the organizers before their bosses get to them and tell them they're not allowed, and then they can play dumb and say, oh, I didn't know I wasn't a spokesperson. And as for the question about breaking through in other areas where we don't have a big chapter, I think that's another thing, another function that the magazine serves, because like I heard from someone in Edmonton, for example, who wanted to know if there was a Spring chapter, and there's not, but he can write an article about anything that's going on in Edmonton, and then he might start to find like-minded people in that city through the article. And lastly, in regards to the question about like, yeah, there's so much corporate control. I'm not gonna pretend it, like the amount that we rely on social media for our information and platforms like Google, it's not pretty. Like the challenges are immense. But I think the best answer I can provide right now is just that we shouldn't rely only on social media like Facebook and Twitter. We have to diversify distribution and make Spring more than social media, as Sarah was saying. Podcast is a great idea because podcasts are the last kind of media product where it's actually chronological in your feed, so it's not manipulated by an algorithm that's boosting like the biggest corporations. Newsletters, again, it goes straight to people's inboxes. It's not being manipulated by a tech company. And then we're also creating physical media. We produced a booklet, we do in-person events, and we create one-on-one relationships. So that's how we're bringing it like off the phone and into real life.
That's awesome. I echo a lot of what Sarah just said, and then I think like the last question about the ephemeral nature of social media is really interesting, and how do you have a memory of a class if like Meta can just delete your entire existence? And I just agree with what you just said. Like we need to diversify our methods of publication, and just thinking about social media as just one tool to bring awareness to issues, and other forms like books or documentary can be like more long-term and more correctly preserve social movement narratives. And then the question about how do we reach people who are not in the core or like more rural areas? I think we just have to like keep the assumption that someone is doing that work there, because someone always is, and be like, I'm a documentarian, so I'm gonna just be a good chase producer. Like you gotta just look for them, find them in the yellow pages, and bring them on board. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think you two kind of addressed most of the things. This was a great discussion. Maybe I'll just touch on the piece about creating revolutionary journalism in places that are not the big cities. And I think the actual question you're asking is how to grow a revolutionary organization in those places. in many ways, because as I said, everything that's reported on Spring is because someone is in that movement or someone is going to that thing and doing that thing, right? And it's being reflected in the publication. So if we have a Hamilton chapter, which we do now, we're now seeing we got like 2 episodes on the podcast produced by Hamilton comrades. We have multiple TikTok interviews produced by Hamilton comrades, and it's because those people are there building that local relationship with the workers there, with the movements there, and reflecting it. And I think the publication is actually a great way to grow your organizational capacity if you are starting off alone, as Emma kind of touched upon it. So for example, in Montreal, we have a very small new chapter, Vancouver, a small new chapter, and London is a growing chapter. And one of the ways you can attract other people who might be very interested, might have similar ideas to you, is by reporting and writing on what's happening locally there, using that publication, and that might attract people. On our social media, we always, on our Instagram, people are always DMing us saying like, hey, do you have a chapter in Calgary? Do you have a chapter in Winnipeg? And often it's like 1 or 2 people, but those 1 or 2 people, if we are able to connect them using the publication, well, you know, that's a party. That's a party. So I would say that yes, it is important to be doing this work in outside of the big centers, but I don't think people from the big centers need to go parachuting in. The people are there. We need to just find the people. We need to start organizing with them, right? Build our organization with them. And then on the topic of, in terms of like archiving, the ephemeral thing about internet and stuff, I think, that's interesting. And I think like there are multiple ways I think Spring is trying to push back. Emma already kind of pointed it, but I think physical media, like we have Spring Sheets, and I think at the end of the day, it's also like the people. Like we're not just creating content, and I just want to keep stressing on that. Like the whole point of this session is that we're actually not just writing as an intellectual exercise. We are really, what we're doing is we are building the movement, and we want the movements to win. And that's our focus when we write anything, right? It's like, you know, if you might ask, like, who are we going to interview? And sometimes we will interview people who are staff rep or execs or whatever. But point is, will this help the movement go forward or not? Will this raise the confidence of the working class or not? And we want the movements to win because that's the stake we have in this game, right? We don't want to be a disruptive force in any movement we take part on. Leftists get a really, you know, people actually hate leftists. People hate far left people because the far left, they go in and they say, oh, you workers, you're organizing that way. That's actually wrong. We know better because we read Lenin, blah, blah, blah. We don't want to be doing that. Right? And it's horrible. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be doing things that are harmful to the people who've put in that work to get where we're at, right? So we want to be amplifying voices in a way that is not that does not fragment movements. And that's something that we, as socialists, we need to be very responsible with what we do. We need to see ourselves as leaders and be very responsible about the consequences that our actions have. We stress a lot on activity, but we don't say do anything and everything. We have to be very strategic and we have to be very responsible. And that is the responsibility a revolutionary journalist carries with everything they write, everything they put out, everything they say, and everything they distribute. So I'll just kind of like end on that.